Welcome everyone to another episode of Hard Work Beats Talent, where we aim to draw upon the insights of our inner circle in order to help our listeners make more informed decisions about their career and life through the wisdom and mistakes made by us and our guests. I'm Alex, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Nikki. How's it going?
Very well, man. Very well.
Good. So on today's episode, we are very, very excited to be joined by a good friend and member of our inner circle, Kenzo. Hi, Kenzo.
Hello, guys. How are you?
So starting from the top, do you want to give us a brief elevator pitch on who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I met Nikki over a decade ago now. It would have been. Right now, I'm a legal director for a grocery delivery startup. So I started as a lawyer, studied law at university, did my training contract and law schools at Kaplan in London. My training contract was at Bird & Bird. I had a year as a paralegal in the corporate department at Travers Smith as well. And then, trained, qualified at Bird & Bird, moved on to Deliveroo from there. Joined their legal team just before Series F, which is the crazy old days. From there went to an investment fund called Entrepreneur First. That kind of, I'll explain a bit more later, but it's a talent investor. And what that means is, pre-idea and pre-business, they invite exceptional individuals onto their program. They form teams, build businesses, and then they decide which ones they want to invest in. So pretty cool for a lawyer to be involved in that. And then I went back into food and grocery delivery. I was a legal director at Wheezy, and now I'm legal director at The Modern Milkman.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. And do you want to mention Forzy as well in that pitch?
Absolutely, yeah. No, yeah. I should.
We'll get into the details as well.
So I also have a side hustle called 40. It's all about, the destruction of echo chambers and allowing people to engage in conversations that, they have opinions on but don't necessarily always get a chance to discuss. And something that I hold dear and something that has sustained a really exciting business that's hopefully going places.
Love to hear it. Now that sounds really awesome. So I'll kick off by just telling a very quick anecdote. As Kenzo mentioned, we met, I think it was like 2018. It must have been around 2018, 2019.
2000.
Oh, sorry. 2000. It was 2008.
2008. Summer.
That's what I was thinking. 2008. Yeah, I'm well behind. And I worked at Evans Cycles bike shop. And Kenzo got a summer job there, part-time.
First job.
First job. He was wet behind the ears, some might say. But that's how we met. We got on really well. And then over the last, whatever it's 14 years now, we've kind of, caught up and more recently, like we got back in touch and we were like, how have we not done this more? Yeah. It was actually mad when we went for brunch and I walked in and you're like this 6 foot something, like 30-year-old man now. And I was like, okay, my memory of you didn't sync up with what, who you are now and what I remembered. But anyway, I digress. So in your elevator pitch, you kind of explained and set out the things you got going on. You got a lot on your plate, and it's very varied. So you're a solicitor, and you have a side hustle called 40 as well. So let's start with the legal side and dive a little bit deeper into what you do. So do you want to give us a bit of a rundown on like what discipline of law you work in now? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because as a legal director, I'm responsible for the legal function in the business. So prior to that, when I was kind of senior legal counsel, it was sort of semi-focused. So I was working primarily in corporate venture capital, which is kind of where I trained and qualified, but across some sort of commercial contracts as well and kind of general commercial and need that the business had. Now it's transitioned more into kind of strategic legal advice, advising the business more on things like market expansion, into new territories, and also the bread and butter things that the business needs. So fundraising rounds and commercial contracts, and really thinking about ways that, you know, a business can be empowered to go out and do the kind of best analogy that I've heard to describe an in-house legal team is kind of, and a lot of in-house functions actually is it's kind of like the operating system upon which the business can go and, you know, really excel.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a different dynamic, different role, but I enjoy it because it's varied enough and it's kind of commercial enough that I can lean into a different part of my life that's, you know, I guess more focused on business and just being involved in turning nothing into something.
Yeah, and I guess through that you learn a lot about capital, how to get funding,
Correct,
but I mean, obviously the commercial side and legal side are play massively into that.
Yeah, and really interesting to hear. So, like the listeners, this is the first time I'm meeting and hearing from Kenzo, and what you describe sounds extremely varied and interesting. But for the benefit of both me and the listeners, it'd be quite helpful to go back to how you got into the legal sector to begin with, and why your route ended up going where it's gone. I think it would just be helpful for them to know, say from university to where you are now, what that looked like.
Sure. So it was an interesting route and an interesting story. Probably prior to university is the right place to start. So I did the IB, the International Baccalaureate. So we did 6 subjects as opposed to, you know, 3 or 4 that you do at A-levels. And the subjects that I majored in were English, history and philosophy. Now, those are all, I guess, essay writing subjects. And, you know, my favorite was philosophy. I kind of loved an early introduction to critical thinking, but like with a purpose. So I did that. When it came around to...
Sorry, there's so many parallels. Philosophy was like my favourite A-level. And sorry, continue. But I'm just hearing, it's almost like listening to myself here. To carry on.
But when it came around to kind of deciding university courses, I thought that it would make the most sense to do something that was vocational, but drew on the kind of skills that I'd learned as opposed to the discipline that I'd learned. So that's why I decided to do law at university. And query whether that was the right decision. But, you know, there's an argument to suggest that I perhaps would have enjoyed other things, because I did do some other modules at university. So I did a few business modules and I did some Spanish as well. So there was a bit.
So that kind of the querying into why you went into law, is it because you had things that you were maybe more interested in at the time, or now you're realizing you have other interests as opposed to being in like...
Well, I think good question, and the answer to that is there are a lot of people who have been able to have really successful legal careers without having studied law. So I think the query is whether university is supposed to be a propeller to your career, or for you to hone your ability to learn in an academic sense, right?
Yeah.
So those are the two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
And actually the further away I get from university, you know, if I was advising a 16, 17-year-old now, I'd probably say go and do something that you love or that you're really interested in, because that's easier to do really well in, as opposed to something that you think is going to, give you a good career.
Yeah.
I've got to ask a question. If you were to make that same decision today, what would you do?
What subject would that be? Probably sort of...
Would you go to university?
I probably would go to university.
Okay.
Because the beer is cheap.
Not so much the fees though.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. I think I was one of the last years that was the $3,000.
The $3,000, yeah.
Whereas now it's like...
It's a joke.
I mean, we were talking about this with some friends from uni the other day, and it was kind of like the contact hours that you had at Exeter University for English was something like 2 hours a week.
Mad.
So if they're paying $9,000 for that, we were like, honestly, you could resurrect Shakespeare, he wouldn't charge you that much. Like you just wouldn't charge you that much. It's
facts.
Ridiculous. Yeah. So yeah, I probably, if I was to go back now, I'd probably do something like business economics, that sort of thing.
Nice. So going back to your sort of your timeline, you enjoyed some other subjects, and where were you going from there?
Yeah, so I got involved in a fair amount of other stuff at university as well. So I was kind of club president for the football club in my third year, and that is running a mini business. So things like setting membership fees and going out into the town and negotiating discounts for the football club, that sort of thing. So I spent the summer going into third year doing a lot of that sort of thing. And what I did was propose to the university that all of the, I guess, blank and dormant space around your student login page could be monetized. Sorry. So I kind of, because I'd gone and got lots of discounts for the university football club, I sort of proposed to the uni, you know, you can put these discounts here, and there's a huge amount of traffic, especially around exam time. You could leverage that. And they thought, this is a great idea. And they said, we're going to use it internally for like the campus shop, the library and that sort of stuff. And they did that. And then there was a business in London called Meet the Real Me that was looking at alternative ad spaces at the time. So I got in contact with them and said, hey, look, this is what I've been doing. And they offered me a job. So that was
hustling since day.
That was my first job out of university.
Yeah. Amazing.
They were an interesting business. Like an interesting business. It was bad.
So what? You actually went to work for them?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a funny old story, because what they were doing at the time, and bear in mind, this is a time, I'm going to say this first and then finish the rest of the story.
Yeah.
This was around the time when Skype was a thing.
Okay.
Right? So they were effectively getting PhotoMe booths, you know, where
Yeah.
putting them on campus and then allowing people to take kind of like Accenture interviews in them. And I was kind of
That's
like,
hilarious.
Skype's a thing.
Yeah.
You just don't need to do this. And they were kind of like underpinned by like a recruitment business that I wasn't involved in. So my job was business development.
Right.
So what I was tasked with doing was, I guess, looking at ways that they can monetize this really nascent and quite terrible technology. So I was kind of like trying to speak to supermarkets to say sort of like, could you do mass interviews in store and stuff like that, and just on the fly. So had a very...
What was like their... You know, what was their business model around who this was for?
Well,
is it like some sort of marketing, or was it purely for this recruitment?
Dude, yeah, that they thought was that enough companies would pay them money to be on campus. And
right.
Yeah, it's not a problem that I thought like massively existed, but it was a really, really good, you know, introduction into business and the things that they were thinking about. And all the while that I was there, I was applying for training contracts. And for anybody, I guess, who's listening, who's a lawyer, I made a massive mistake with applying for training contracts, in that I was sending the same application to every law firm. So probably had about 2 or 3 cycles of doing that. And then I had a really interesting conversation with some lawyers that I bumped into at a pub that I work for. And what they explained was it's a much more fruitful enterprise to think about something that you really enjoy, and where there may be synergies between what you enjoy and what the law firm does, their sector focus. And when I did that and thought, right, I enjoy this, I enjoy that, I enjoy that, when it got to interview, much more successful in being able to, I guess, translate that excitement, because it was already things that I enjoyed.
There's so many gems which I just want to make sure we're capturing here. So the first one that springs to mind is the fact that you didn't find it was too early to add value whilst being at university, and that actually led to an opportunity. And one thing I would say to anyone listening that might be at university, and I know I had a lot of free time which I look back on and think, I maybe could have done a lot more with that. It's kind of never too early to try things, and what's the worst that can happen? You got a job out of it, and although that job wasn't like where you are now, it was probably a great introduction to the real working world. The second thing was, despite the setbacks with the training contract applications, actually taking on board advice. Like we've discussed it before on the pod, the fact that you get given a lot of advice for free, and a lot of it's not great, but at some point you have to make a decision as to what makes sense and go with it. But the fact that you can draw upon it and recognize the value that you were able to extract from that conversation, I think is fantastic. And people should like kind of keep an eager ear to people that might be able to help them take that next step in their career.
It's especially if you don't have kind of like an infrastructure of role models that have already done, you know, what you're trying to do. Gems like that, I got lucky. But, you know, speaking to people and finding out kind of what am I doing wrong, you know, for me was invaluable, and I think it probably is still true.
But that speaks really highly, I think, of your character and true to, like, you know, your ethic as well. I think it's quite common for people to kind of, you know, not want to take advice from people that have made similar mistakes or have, you know, had certain learning experiences, and want to help you avoid making those same mistakes. So being able to listen, and also, you know, you have to be a filter. You have to apply a filter to what's relevant, what's not relevant. But don't be afraid to listen to someone else who may have more knowledge and experience than oneself.
And just on that, my dad used to always say to me that clever people learn from their own mistakes, whereas wise people learn from the mistakes of others. And by the sounds of it, you clearly did that in this context and have borne the fruit of it. So fantastic.
Yeah.
Actually,
like I think.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No. I was only going to say, I don't sort of like give myself too much credit for that because it was kind of like incidental and I got lucky. But I think that if anything can be taken from it is kind of.
But you see, you were in a situation where you recognised there was like a problem statement that needed resolving, and you asked the right questions to the right people, in the hope and search of the solution.
Yeah.
Which I think you have to be quite a conscious person to be in that frame of mind.
And that's the lesson. Yeah. When I say luck, I mean kind of, you know, I was working in a pub. Yeah. 2 drunk Bird and Bird lawyers came in and I had a great chat with them. And they told me that, you know, apply like this rather than like this, you'll probably be more successful.
And I just want to draw on that point that you made around picking something that you enjoy, right? Even if it's not directly, like, look, 3 of us, we like playing football, right? We're not necessarily going to be professional footballers, right? But if you can pick something that within your job or your career, you can utilize your passion, then you're actually stimulating that excitement factor within you and the passion as well. And when you can bring that to the table in whatever it is you're doing, you're definitely going to see the fruits from it because you'll just enjoy your job more, you know, if nothing else. And
one thing on that, the fruits aren't necessarily merely financial. And exactly. I recognize that it's easy for us to say that now, 10 years post university, where maybe we're a bit more established, but it will get to a point with work, if you're only doing it for financial purposes, that it's unfulfilling. Whereas, like you said, if you're pursuing your passion, the kind of return will be something
beyond financial.
Precisely.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and I actually remember having a conversation with you about this at a pub in around where we're from, and it was that kind of, you know, a particular area that you were interested in, sports and things that the law firm, you know, had an affiliation with, that kind of, I remember you specifically mentioning that. So, you know, you talking about it like years on, it was clearly quite an important part of why you applied for the firm.
Yeah, absolutely. And it turned out when I got there, that area of life. But it is what it is.
It is. We're learning. So going back to your journey. So you finished uni. You went and had this, you know, amazing opportunity that you know, obviously you took a lot away from. What was next? Like, how did you lead up to doing your LPC or getting the training contracts?
So that summer I had 2 vacation schemes, one at Bird and Bird and one at Pins and Masons. I enjoyed the one at Bird and Bird a lot more. Okay. And to be honest, I had no choice because I only got one offer. So so I took the Bird and Bird one, was unsuccessful at Pins and Masons. And at that point, it was 2 years before you started your training contract and 1 year before you were sent on your LPC.
So did you do an LLB at uni?
I did,
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And just for the benefit of some of our listeners, we've spoken about this before,
Yeah.
but LLB, law degree, which allows you to do one more year, which is your legal practice course, before doing 2 years training, which you do at a law firm, and then you qualify after that. So that's what we're speaking through here,
Yeah.
just for the benefit of the non-lawyers.
And so I did the vacation scheme, and then I had a year to kill.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who was working at Travers Smith, who was a trainee at the time. No, actually, he was a paralegal at the time. And he said that they were looking for a new paralegal. So I went to work there in their corporate finance group for a year. And to be honest, that is where I kind of, I will stop short of say fell in love. But that's probably where
You had a really strong romantic connection with.
with corporate law.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just kind of my first introduction to actually legal doing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Someone once said to me, actually, on a vacation scheme, that law is I'll use the word pain to study, but a pleasure to practice. And it sounds like you got to see that.
yeah, absolutely. I would say so far you've both done the LPC, so it's so far removed from, the theory of it. And with corporate law, it was kind of conceptually, for me, okay to understand. And it made sense. Deals would arrive at your desk and be done in 2 weeks. I quite liked that pace of change, that turnover, and the way that it was structured as well. So you'd follow the same pattern for each deal. Especially as a paralegal, there was a limited amount that I could actually do. So just learning how to do that really well was a really good foundation for what turned into a career in corporate law, and just trying to hone.
And applying the principles of hard work, because I remember when you were there, and you excelled quite a bit, didn't you? You kind of moved through the ranks in that paralegal role as well.
Yeah.
No, it's super impressive, man. And where did you go? So you did your training contract. How did you find that experience at Bird & Bird?
So I loved my training contract. I probably, I made some mistakes. I, loved some departments, didn't like other departments so much. So I started in the sports group, and it's an interesting group because they are at the pinnacle of the profession. So they were all far brighter than me. Like, that was my first mistake. So they're all incredibly intelligent and incredibly good at what they do. So I can imagine, it's quite hard to give a trainee something that they can tangibly do. And I was used to coming from Travers Smith, just kind of, here's just a group piece of work.
Yeah.
Go and do it really well. And then you'll get another similar, and then you become better.
Yeah.
Whereas I guess, there was two parts of the department, the commercial sports part, which was fun, I guess, or more fun. And then there was the sports litigation part. And the sports litigation part as a trainee was a lot to do with research and that sort of, legal focus. For me, that's not particularly what I enjoy.
Yeah.
So that I arrived in the department thinking, this is going to be amazing. I'm basically going to be sat next to Arsene Wenger every day.
Yeah.
So
For your
sort
sins.
of like, I think we should be playing 3-5-2 today.
Yeah. But it was like, I guess you like, when you hear of being a sports lawyer, I think you have this like romantic idea of
100%.
I'm going to be on deadline day, closing deals, like signing players. All that kind of stuff. But is it not quite like that?
No, you're not, because you're not a football agent. Who knew?
Yeah.
So it was good though, because the first 6 months, I spent 3 months at Bird & Bird and then 3 months at the FA.
Very
So
nice.
in their legal team, and that was really, really interesting. That was a really interesting experience to go on to comment there.
So despite not necessarily enjoying your first seat that much, you still looked into doing the sports secondment then? Was it, because presumably that was with the same department, right?
Yeah, so that seat is mandatory, so you
right.
always split 3 months at the firm and 3 months at the FA. So
Nice.
for me, as a huge football fan, it was kind of
A no-brainer.
That's what I wanted to do,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the firm knew that.
Yeah.
They knew that I was really into football. So from the moment that I accepted my training contract, I played for the football team for 2 years before I stepped foot in the building. Really.
Yeah.
So,
I don't think in the London Legal League, right?
We just played in a power league.
Oh, okay, fair.
Yeah.
No, we used to play 11 aside, but I was thinking I don't remember playing Bird and Bird, but that would be why.
We did have a pretty handy 11 aside team. We used to kind of have friendlies against other law firms every now and then. But
well, we won the competitive cup, so
did you?
So who wants to slap there on the table first?
What's the opposite of a humble brag?
So
no, we digress.
yeah, I know, right? So for people listening that are thinking, oh, okay, I want to, or I already have a training contract. You talked about some of the day-to-day stuff. So there was research, in the paralegal side as well. It was quite transactional and repeatable work.
Yeah.
So kind of if you were to do like a snapshot of your 2 years in private practice, what would you say, some of the key day-to-day tasks that you would do, just to help our listeners and viewers understand what it is that you would kind of be doing in a training contract? And I appreciate it varies from firm to firm. Everyone has very different experiences, but it'd be good to get your take.
And when answering that, if you could just draw out some of the key skills that you think were useful, that'd be helpful too.
Yeah, sure. I think kind of to answer the question properly, I'll split it into departmental work. So if I'm in a corporate seat as a junior lawyer or a trainee, I may be helping on a venture capital transaction. So investors want to invest in, let's say, Citymapper. They're raising a private financing round. So that transaction typically looks like an investment agreement where the investors will sort of say, here are the terms upon which we're going to put money into the business. And then you'll have another document, which is the company's Articles of Association, which will effectively say, here's how the company is going to be governed once we've put your money into the company. And then in order to actually enter into the investment and complete it, you have a whole bunch of ancillary documents. And what that means is, you have a set of board minutes that essentially say, okay, we're taking on this investment. Is this okay?
Yeah. And the company approves it.
Correct. Yeah. You have a set of shareholders resolutions that sort of says, existing shareholders, is it okay if we get some new shareholders in?
Yeah. So you're involved in drafting those documents.
Yeah. So you're involved heavily in kind of being a support function to the leading lawyers on the transaction to help them get all of that in place. You may also be involved in due diligence as well. So that's, if a business was a car, due diligence is lifting the bonnet up and looking under the hood to see what's actually helping it run and whether,
do you have a ticking timing belt or something?
Correct. So whether how the business has been represented actually marries to what it actually is. Yeah. So that's part of the due diligence exercise. So you may be involved in that. And the key skills that you need for both as a junior lawyer, attention to detail is really important. I wasn't that great at that. That was a real kind of, I guess, development point for me in the earlier days. I'm way more conceptual than, to sit, concentrate and read for, 8 hours and not miss a full stop. Sort of thing. So there are lawyers that are excellent at that. There are lawyers that are less good at that. I'd probably put myself in that bucket. But that's a key skill that you're going to need. You're also going to need an exceptional amount of organization because you may be working on 3, 4, 5 deals at the same time. To know where things are, to have answers before people ask questions. That sounds like
a big one.
Intangible piece of advice, but to, I guess, bring it to life a bit. If you are working on a set of ancillary documents and a partner asks you where you are on that, you should already kind of have an answer. To know. Yeah, that's your bit. That's your bit that you're supposed to be looking for. So attention to detail, a high level of organization. And then I think there are a bunch of soft skills that probably don't get talked about enough. So an enthusiasm, at a general level enthusiasm for what you do, a level of humility because you are still learning, recognizing that you don't know everything. I think is a skill that can be developed.
Just very briefly on that, I think being in such a highly competitive environment that law firms can be, it's important to remember that point that a lot of people will, they want to sort of talk themselves up or talk about how much they know and what deal they worked on last and how great they were. But, stay true to to where you are, and you know, sort of understanding maybe your pain points and working on improving them.
Yeah, nobody dislikes a humble learner, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I've got a younger brother, and that's what I'm kind of always saying to him: just enjoy the learning process. You're a junior professional. You can afford to make mistakes. Nobody's going to look at you and go, "What?"
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be kind of like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's fairly normal. Here's how
The
you
growth
don't
is
fuck
in
up again."
is in the mistakes, right? Yeah.
I think Jocko Willink says, "Stay humble or be humbled." I think
Yeah.
it's
Love
as simple as that.
That is, 5 words to say what I kind of said in like 79,000. Yeah.
Typical lawyer counting
Yeah.
words as well.
So moving on to your in-house experience and how you've got to where you are today. You mentioned Deliveroo. It'd just be interesting to hear how you made the decision to leave private practice, because from what I understand, the two are quite different. And just bringing that to light a bit.
Yeah, so really kind of like whistle-stop tour of how this happened. So I was working in the corporate venture capital group at Bird & Bird, and incidentally, we'd worked on a number of food tech related transactions. So we did an accelerator program for Just Eat, where they invested in a bunch of startups, 5 per cohort. And I was working for a company, or advising a company called Spoon Guru as well, and a number of the companies that came out of the Just Eat program. So one of my colleagues had just accepted a job, I think at maybe Bumble it was at the time, and the Deliveroo job came across her desk, and she told me about it, and I got in contact with the recruiter and said, this would be really interesting, I've got some relevant experience. And then I interviewed there. Initially, when I went in for the interview and just saw the buzz of the place, I was just sold from that. And I went in as a commercial lawyer, which is interesting. I applied for a corporate job, and it went to somebody who was more senior than me, who's a really good friend and now. And they said, well, there is a commercial role as well. And I thought, just get in.
Yeah, for sure.
Just get in, and I'm sure you can pick up, I'm sure you can learn. And then after 6 months, I moved into the corporate team there. And that's how that story came about.
And how would you say the two differ then, in-house to private practice?
Well, I think in very basic terms, you're advising 2 different types of people, or businesses. So one, you're advising multiple businesses as an external partner. So you're not as close to the business risk as you might otherwise be. When you're in-house, what you're really advising on is commercial risk. So you're saying, we want to achieve this. How do we do this? Sometimes the answer might be, you can't do this, or you can do this, but you have to accept X amount of risk if you're going to do this. So the difference is really quickly learning and having an appreciation for kind of like the commercial risk profile in the business, and kind of going from there.
Yeah, and that in order to be able to do that, you need to spend some time in developing your own commercial awareness, I think, for people listening. So I think you already had quite a natural instinct for commercial awareness, from your university days, because you were working with a website and trying to fill ads, and and then in your first job out of uni, it was clearly there. And I just want to point out that what it sounds to me like is you had an incredible instinct to be able to adapt, and I think that's just such a crucial skill is in anything you do, but being able to adapt and move from role to role, especially if you are in a private practice. Generally, you will qualify into a particular area of law, and you may find that you're interested in it, but you may not want to sit in that seat for 30 years until you make partner or something. And if you do want to move on and you want to move into in an in-house legal role and support a business in whatever it is, corporate, commercial, construction, whatever it might be, is that you need to have the ability to be able to adapt, grow, and learn is really important.
Yeah,
you clearly had that in abundance because you move through different things.
The general counsel at Deliveroo, a lady called Chantal Zemba, a good friend of mine, and I think probably the best bit of advice that she gave me whilst I was at Deliveroo is that, even if you're a very disciplined lawyer and you're focused on one area, you can probably learn to do something else. It depends how much you kind of want to learn and how willing you are to kind of go, I'll figure this out. And I guess it's that entrepreneurial spirit that allows companies like Deliveroo to exist in the first place, right? So I guess your legal team has to mirror that in some respect and just kind of carry the burden even when you don't have all of the expertise.
Well, I think like working in-house and whatever, because you have to be a bit of a generalist. You have to dabble in bits and bobs of different areas of law. But ultimately, because I work in-house, just for the benefit of the listeners, if you didn't listen to episodes 1 and 2, please do. We're essentially executors, and I'm not saying that private practice lawyers aren't, but we have to really clearly understand the business that we work in and their risk profile and the way people work, the way you deliver the products or services that you're delivering. And you're not just learning law, you're not just practicing law. You have to, talk some tax language, some finance language, some sales language, because it will help you build relationships. But like, you have to be in tune with all the different parts of the business.
I'll give you a real life today example of exactly that. So I work for a company called The Modern Milkman, and what we do is a subscription-based drop service for all your essentials. So your milk, eggs, bread, a couple of times a week. And we have hubs and warehouses where we deliver from. We own the leases to those hubs and warehouses. And we engage third-party delivery service providers to actually deliver for us. Today, one of those delivery service providers asked whether they can put a vending machine in one of the hubs. And seems like a pretty binary thing, right? You either say yes or no. But actually the question to us was, can I put a vending machine in a hub? But our answer was, yes, you can, provided that there's nothing prohibiting that from a fixtures and fittings perspective in the lease. There are no health and safety or allergens issues. If someone's allergic to peanuts, and also there are no insurance issues as well, because if that vending machine falls on somebody, who's liable? And if there's a premium uplift, if we have to pay more money to have that piece of equipment in our hub, should we pass on that cost to you? So it sounds like a really simple thing, but query whether somebody who doesn't know about the business would think about all of those things before advising the business.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I know we spent a lot of time on legal, but I think it'd be really helpful just to get, because of how varied your career's been, and I feel like we could probably do a whole other episode on just your legal career, but what sort of recommendations you would have for prospective students who are considering embarking on a career in law?
And some of the challenges that they may experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think I'll probably start with the second one first. So I think in terms of challenges, it's competitive. It's still a super competitive industry to get into. And I think the piece of advice that I gave earlier around finding what your synergies are with specific law firms is still true and will be super helpful. I think kind of another challenge is typically if you've gone to university and you've studied law, you're used to being fairly intelligent and bright in your subset or your class. You need to kind of completely, or I would say it's helpful to completely unlearn everything that you know, and be kind of like a canvas that allows you to be taught in a way that you weren't expecting. And even when you think you might know, be prepared to be challenged. So strong opinions, fine, but weakly held as a junior. Those are my two bits. And then in terms of kind of the first question, I think was what would be my advice for people wanting to get into the industry. I'd say it's a really, really good thing to do. I would say kind of consider why you want to get into the industry. What is your fundamental motivation? And the example I'll use is if you are really transfixed by and in love with the law, jurisprudence and case law and everything like that, maybe that you're better off being a barrister or a litigant.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you are interested in helping things move along, facilitating businesses doing things, but you're not necessarily interested in making key decisions to allow them to do things. That's a way of looking at it. That's a way that you could help. A legal career is great in that respect. If you are interested in, risk taking and being the most creative person in the room and coming up with ideas and that sort of thing, there may be other careers that are good for you outside of law. So I think fundamentally the anecdote that I'll take away is really think hard about why you want to do it.
And sorry, just I think it segues quite nicely into what you do outside of law, but at least from my own personal experience, I think it would also be fair to say that it provides a great platform for other ventures because it gives you that kind of hard understanding or like hard skill base to fall back on. So yeah, moving on to 40.
Yeah, sure.
Tell us about it. Like, what does it involve, and how did the idea come up? We'd be interested to hear.
Sure. So I was on holiday with my best friend in Italy, and we went to dinner. And he is religious, and I'm not. Sorry, Mum. So we spent about 3 hours discussing whether it would be immoral to take your child to church before they could decide whether or not they were religious. And we had different ideas on that topic. But the next day, sort of brutally hungover, I kind of opened my laptop and wrote down 39 more questions, statements, topics like that. I just finished off paying off my student loan, so I thought, okay, right, there's an extra 500 quid a month that I could put to use. So I kind of got the statements printed on a deck of cards, which was interesting because I made that classic mistake of not understanding scale the first time. So when the first deck arrived, they were like huge, and I was kind of that's not why I ordered
A3 sized cards.
But we go again. So yeah, I got them printed and set up an Instagram account, and got all of my mates to talk about it and create a bit of a buzz. And people really enjoyed having these conversations. The reason it's called 40 is because when I was making the cards brutally hungover, I kind of got bored at 40 and closed my laptop. And it
probably a good signal that maybe people will have an appetite up to about that.
Yeah,
and in fact,
if you can get through 40 cards, fair play to you.
I bought the cards, support and all that, and I took them on our sort of group friends holiday in Mallorca last summer, and we had a go, and I think we got through about 5
maximum.
Yeah,
maximum.
A lot of there was some deep conversations being had, and I love the concept. I think it's wicked. I think anyone that's interested in breaking boundaries, having open conversations about stuff at dinner and things is a good one.
And actually, before we move on, you said something to me before we kicked off about the general ethos behind the cards. I think it'd be really helpful to share that with the audience in terms of...
Yeah, absolutely. So the brand is built on a foundation, and that foundation is you can't really understand the world until you understand more than your own perspective of it. And that allows us to do the card game, which kind of sells on our own website and Etsy and that sort of thing. And then it also allows us to do kind of, mini documentaries. We've got one coming out later this year on modern dating. So we're going to do kind of like a critical analysis of, why people's fingers get RSI from Hinge. A lot of stuff that we could go into. And then we also do kind of educational resources for schools as well. So that concept and that premise allows us to branch off into lots of different things whilst we decide and kind of consider what should be our primary focus and what's going to return, I guess, the best business, because that's what, we want to do.
Fantastic.
Nice. And what about, you got podcasts as well?
Yeah, we've got podcasts. So anywhere where you get your podcast, it's called the 40 Podcast. So have a listen. And on that, we talk about anything from kind of, state to private education to fear. We've got one coming out on anger. We've got one coming out on Schadenfreude, which is going to be an interesting topic.
For those listening that don't know what that is, do you want to explain?
Absolutely. So that is, I think it's a German word, and it loosely translates into the joy and happiness that you feel at somebody else's misfortune. Right. Which is something that we all kind of get, but no one really talks about, no one really understands why. Yeah. And it's an interesting one for us.
That just takes me back to being at school when your team's lost on the weekend and you come in and everyone's like, Schadenfreude?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what was at play there.
Yeah, I
Nice.
probably completely butchered how you say that, but
At least you tried.
yeah.
So that's super interesting. We were having a conversation about it before we started the pod, and the whole concept sounds sick, especially the sort of educational technology side of it. Helping PSHE, yeah, I'll get that right, side of things, and helping teachers be more effective in their teaching and more efficient as well. So I think even any teachers listening, check out 40, because they could really save many hours in your week. So moving on to then kind of like, how did you set up? What was the process? How did you build to where you are today? Because balancing a challenging and demanding legal career with a side hustle and a business you're trying to develop and grow, and is not easy.
Yeah.
So do you want to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So for me, the reason why I think 40 has been a success, and it's not the finished article yet, is because I made a commitment to myself and to the business that I was going to do a little bit every day. And it doesn't matter if it's, we send one email, something will be worked on every day. And
The compounding effect.
Exactly.
We talk about that a lot.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I think there's so much value in that. And in terms of kind of like tangible steps to set up, first, actually, the reason why I was able to take those steps to set up is because it didn't feel like a chore. If something feels like a chore, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to sustain it.
Yeah. Or it will succeed.
Exactly.
Right.
So for me, it was kind of like a creative outlet. And I thought, well, look, we can create this content about anything. There's so many different places that we can go with this. And people were engaging with that, and still are engaging with the sort of content that we put out. And people were giving us feedback that we're having really excellent moments coming out of the card game and, when we're playing it. So we thought, well, what else can we do? And that's when it kind of occurred to us that, PSHE only became a mandatory subject in 2020. No teachers are trained specifically to teach that. So there's already a delta there. So you could get, a year 9 geography teacher teaching, a class about FGM, whereas that person's going to have to have gone and done a lot of background research, learnt about it, understood the kind of, I guess, the emotional nuances around that subject to be able to effectively teach it. And, well, we thought we could do that because there is enough of an overlap between the conversations that we've been having, and we could put that on a platform and see whether schools were interested in using that tool. And it turns out that some of the schools that we're speaking to are, and we're trying to grow day to day. But as I was saying to you earlier, it's kind of, for me, the most important thing now is how we get from one school to 5 schools, not how we get from one school to 400, 500 schools. Yeah. And so it may be slow. It may take 3, 4, 5 years to get to where we want to be, but compounding, that compounding effect of doing a little bit every day is all I'm interested in right now.
So a couple of key takeaways are enjoy what you're doing, have a keen interest in it, probably passion comes along with that. Do a little bit every day. Don't expect huge results in the first year. It's going to take time, and that's okay. And also dedicate, how much time you have to dedicate to it will probably be will correlate to how long it may take you to kind of scale the business and get to a point.
No, absolutely. I think you summed that up really well. One thing I think it would be quite interesting to hear as well from you is nowadays we get a lot of people saying, you can side hustle your way to financial freedom, this, that and the other, and talk's cheap, I think, when it comes to that sort of thing, and action often dictates how far things go. I'd be interested in hearing how it's actually been in practice. Like Nikki said, you're maintaining a very successful and I'm sure demanding career. How has having the side hustle been alongside that?
The best way I would describe it is if you remember back to when you are at university or at school in exam period, where you think every hour God sends, I could be doing something. Yeah. So the stress of it is not so much that oh my God, I'm not where I think I should be. It's that kind of finding that balance of how much time should I be putting into this. I could be doing something, and thinking whenever I'm not doing something, my competitors, they're not sleeping.
Yeah.
So yeah, I sound like Anton Leviev there, don't I?
Or Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah.
Hard work, dedication.
Exactly.
When the other person is asleep, you should be training.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is kind of like a difficult thing to balance, because I'm very much kind of work. I can be quite switched on with work, and that's actually ultimately not that productive long term, because you need to know when your power hour is, right? When you're going to be the most productive, and whether you're going to use that for your main gig or your side gig or whatever it is. But identifying that is super key.
Yeah.
So on the topic of challenges, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced and had to overcome, and did you take any particular lessons from that? You mentioned the A3 cards to begin with, but it'd be interesting in hearing about like some others that you might have overcome.
Yes.
So just to add to that as well, is like just giving some of the truths about having a full-time job and doing something on the side, because like Alex said, everyone's an entrepreneur, everyone's a CEO, of the world and whatever, so along with those like challenges, how you overcame them, like some of the truths about actually, coming from someone who's actually doing it, who's living it, not just talking it.
First truth is making money is hard. Making money is hard. The easy bit is coming up with something that could make money. For me, like I could come up with business ideas 10, 15 a day, biodegradable chewing gum. Great. Yeah. How do you do it? Don't know.
It's the execution. Exactly. I think as Gary Vee says, is like,
it's the execution.
Anyone can come up with the idea.
Because
the execution is key.
What I'm focused on now is turning into a good businessman. And the way that I think that I do that is focus on all of the back end stuff that, makes you a good businessman, understanding your product, understanding your market, understanding how you get it in front of people, and understanding what makes them buy. All that unglamorous stuff. I've kind of gone through a transition of, and this is a key learning, of, narcissistic, great, I got this business from sort of 0 to 1, and I didn't know I could do that before I did it. That's all gone now. I don't care about that. Like, I know I can do that. Now the next bit is 1 to 2. Can I run a successful business? Okay, right, I've sold 1,000. Can I sell 10,000? That sort of thing. And then maybe 2 to 3 is kind of like, okay, can I go into another market and do that and learn along the way? So making money is really, really hard. You need to, I guess, iterate to find the right way to do that. And the second I would take away is kind of like, don't drink your own Kool-Aid too much, because when you build a business, people will be like, this is amazing, that's great, and gas you up and say, I'm going to get it in the hands of Piers Morgan and Boris Johnson and, everyone under the sun is going to be on Loose Women, and you're just kind of there, like, initially being like,
Mama, I made it.
Yeah, like literally. Mum, never guess what happens.
Spending money before it's come.
Yeah, exactly.
John said he's going to give it to Boris Johnson.
You'll be so gassed when so many people are doing this. But what I found, and the reason why I don't particularly love the word entrepreneur or the label entrepreneur is, you don't have to, there's no quantifiable threshold after which you can call yourself an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Literally, you could just wake up and kind of like, decide you're like
you had an idea.
Going to work today. I'm not going to work today because I'm an entrepreneur. Sort of thing. That's a thing that you can do. So for me, it's kind of like that's a label for other people to use about me if I ever get to that stage. But for me, it's more about kind of incremental wins and reminding myself why I started doing this. Place. Like, what was it that was enjoyable about it, and trying to do that as much as possible. The other thing that I would say, and probably the last thing I'll say,
sorry, just on that, if you were to use a label, what would that be?
Trying really hard. That's it. That's all I'm doing. I'm just trying to see, there may be one day where
to take an idea and build it into a tangible business.
Correct, yeah. Right. And to build it into a good business.
Yeah.
Because I know that I've got a business. To build it into something that can actually rival my normal salary, that's gonna,
It's gonna take time.
that's gonna take time, and that's a hard thing to do. Like coming up with the cards and stuff like that, I didn't feel like work. Coming up with the design and doing all of that, setting up a podcast, getting a distribution line from China, doing all of those sorts of things that aren't necessarily glamorous, but you have to do. Like we were trained to figure out how to decipher really complex problems as lawyers.
Yeah.
That part is not hard.
Yeah.
The part that I find difficult, that I need to improve at, is, well, actually, how do you take that and how do you take a buzz and turn it into a business?
Yeah.
And there's lots of ways to do that.
Ringing through, but even getting people to buy into it.
Correct.
And gaining customers. That's the thing. And
correct.
Yeah, I just want to share, a bit of my own experience, because so I manage and operate a self-catering holiday business as well. And that it's a living, breathing thing that I do that in my own time. So along with my work, and from time to time you might get the odd call during the day and you have to find time to pick it up or answer some emails, but it's like, right, for example, now our cleaner decided she's leaving, right? Gave us like 4 days notice. We've got like eight or 9 bookings in May. It's fully booked. We need a cleaner, right? This place is in Gloucestershire, and like that's like one of the many challenges you have to overcome when you have a business on the side that is operating, and you've got clients or guests, customers, whatever it is. You have to be able to like adapt and fix or resolve problems and find solutions for things in a very limited space of time. So it's glamorous to be called an entrepreneur, but I think when you're actually in it, you realize that there's a lot that goes on into doing something, like actually running a business.
And if you are ever thinking of a nice weekend in Gloucestershire.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. It's Peacock Cottage. You can find us at peacock-yvalleycottages.co.uk. Y is spelled W-Y-E. You can check it out on there. And we're on booking.com as well, but come direct, you know what I mean? So, thank you.
So, no, this has been fascinating. And like I've learned a lot and find it really interesting to hear how you've juggled both the career and the business up until now, and wish you the very best going forward. I'm sure hopefully 10 years from now we'll be celebrating all the success that you've had in that time.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
But like for the benefit of our listeners, we also like to go way back to break down our interviewees' kind of background and their kind of educational experience. So it'd be really helpful for us to hear about how what your parents' background was, and kind of what your schooling and your socioeconomic background was.
Yeah, so my parents were from Nigeria, so that was where I was born. And my dad was a media broadcaster, and he used to read the news and be on the radio in Nigeria. Unfortunately, in 1994, we were forced to kind of like leave the country because of kind of like the social political situation. So
were you born there?
I was born there.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So we sought asylum in the UK, and so from there, my dad kind of did social work here, and my mum worked her way up from stacking shelves in a supermarket to a civil servant now. So I think I'm quite lucky in that there was never an expectation that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, and for some people, especially, people who may have come from other countries, that may not always be the case. So I think that I was quite lucky in that there was an inherent drive in our family an inherent expectation to go out and, be really successful. So from an early age, looking back now, I think even things like my dad giving me an encyclopedia or like a copy of Encarta. I don't know if you...
Yeah.
Do you remember
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What, for the benefit of me and the listeners, what is Encarta?
It was like an encyclopedic software thing that you would load up.
You'd get one of these like floppy disk things, and you'd like bang it into your computer, and
and it would be like name the capital city of every country in the world. So you had these kind of like super smart, useless information children.
They're clocked in the Encarta.
It would have been incredible at pub quizzes, but weren't allowed in pubs.
Yeah.
Could smash a pub quiz.
Exactly.
But, still gets the brain going.
But gets the brain going.
Yeah.
So there's always been that fascination with kind of like things that I don't know and stuff like that. And then school and education, the journey was I went to a local state school in Richmond called Christ School. And Christ School was great in so many respects. It was great for, I guess, the friendships that were built, and it was great for learning about lots of different backgrounds and lots of different things that, issues that people were dealing with. Even from like a really young age, you developed a sense of empathy that you can't get outside of those sorts of backgrounds. What it wasn't that great at was kind of like the academic side. So, and what I mean by that is, I think classes were probably overcrowded a little bit, and it was difficult for teachers to teach and specifically focus on individuals when you didn't really understand something. So a lot of my learning was done at home. And kind of like teaching myself, trying to learn things. So it ended up doing okay at GCSE, and then got a bursary to a school called King Edward's in Whitley, which was a boarding school where I did the IB, International Baccalaureate. And then from there, went to Exeter University.
I imagine having the kind of two educational experiences growing up, that's probably quite helpful for your edtech now in terms of putting yourself in the mind of some of the teachers that might be using your materials.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of like the contrast and what struck me the most about going to private school at 16 was when you grow up in London, everything is a little bit about kind of what's cool and what's not.
Yeah.
You guys would have experienced this. So people were kind of more concerned with your,
who had the Air Force Ones,
That's
or
it.
the MX-95s.
And I was there in full force with full. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was a vociferous participant in all of that. But when I went to boarding school, what did the biggest difference for me was if people were in a history class, it was because they were interested in history. So it's kind of like, I want to learn about this. And being in that environment, it was kind of like you didn't need to, I guess, pretend that it's not cool to learn about something that you want to learn about. So, in that environment, I just kind of took learning a bit more seriously. And when you think about it, like a private boarding school in Surrey, like all things considered, is essentially a spa resort. So you have like 200 students your age. You have like an Olympic-sized pool, a gym, like a climbing wall, tennis courts and stuff like that.
Different world.
If someone was like, take everyone in London and go and work there for a week, people will bite your hand off. So
Akala talks about that. In fact, there was a talk I went to listen to him a few years back, and he said that he thinks that would be a great kind of solution to a lot of some of the troubles you see. Like actually, if you got boarding schools which weren't solely reserved for people that could afford them, that could be a good way of helping social inequality.
Yeah, for sure. You do learn about a lot of another great example is when people were turning like 17 at school or 16 or whatever, and if you're from where we grew up, you'd have a birthday at like a bowling alley or something like that. These people were doing kind of like 3-course black tie dinners, and I was there kind of like, I'm just expecting Daniel Craig to rock up. This is, like, mental.
Different worlds, aren't they?
Completely different.
Different worlds. So your background sounds really interesting, and I'm sure your parents have like a super interesting background. I'm sure we could have a much more lengthy discussion about that as well. But just in the interest of time, can you give us an idea of who your key influences were growing up? I'd imagine your parents are some of those. And looking at sort of more present day, who you would say your key influences are, and in terms of your professional and personal development, just to give our listeners an idea of if I want to get inspired or just improve myself, where can I look, or who can I look to?
Yeah, so interestingly, kind of, I wouldn't say I had a single key influence before sort of like the age of 16.
Okay.
I would say that where I got my motivation from in terms of I want to do well is probably a fear of failure. I remember the day before my GCSE started, my dad walked into the kitchen where I was revising, and he said in his kind of like brash African accent, "You better study because I don't know anybody," and
Love
left.
that.
So
Yeah.
he was basically kind of like crushed any chance of nepotism there. So it's basically you're on your own.
Yeah.
So for me, I was kind of like,
That's a big lesson.
like,
Bro, he said so much with so few words.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was basically
No time
kind
to
of
mince
like,
his words as well, because he was busy working
Literally.
and providing, right? Along with your mum.
I was kind of like, okay, cool. Well, that's, I'm just going to try as hard as I can. But then when I got to boarding school, there were quite a few key influences for me. Because there were people who kind of like looked like me, but were so different to me. Sort
Right.
of thing. And that was fascinating for me. So it's a guy who I'm really good friends with now, and he actually works with me on 40. He's called Leroy Mark. Huge influence to me growing up. He was the captain of our football team when I was in lower sixth. He just kind of like could always chat to him about, we came from similar backgrounds, how he was dealing with stuff, and it was a bit like having like
Big brother.
a big brother, like a influence. And there were loads of hymns in the years above. So there was a guy called Sung, a guy who was from Korea. He was in my house, and then the mates that I had around me there, they were kind of like key influences and key drivers. And having like-minded people around you that you can bounce ideas off made a massive difference to me. It still does to this day.
Do you know what's interesting? And obviously we've just had like a really brief cross section of your circle and your friendships, but like being of like an immigrant family myself and being one myself, I find like the people that resonate most with you are the ones that are most like you. Shared experiences, come from different backgrounds. Most of my like sort of growing up through school and university and post-university, my friends have been from like really diverse backgrounds. So it's like it's something that really resonates with me as well.
It's like super incidental, but it had turned out to be like very important. Because there wasn't, I guess, parental level role models that had done what I had done. And my dad really didn't know nobody. Yeah.
No, hats off to you, man.
And I'm sure he'd be very proud to see you broadcasting.
Yeah. Badly. He'd be like, he'd have tips.
So just to wrap up, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a pleasure
likewise.
getting to know you, Kenzo, and I'm sure
It won't be the last interaction. That's for sure.
no doubt. But yeah, just to wrap up, we like to end by asking our interviewees to give the best piece of advice they've ever received, or the biggest life lesson you've learned to date.
That's I'm gonna have to think about it for a second. The best piece of advice I've received is probably that you're not as unique as you think you are. And why that's been such a big piece of advice for me is that whatever issue you're facing, whatever hardship, struggle or anything, there's probably somebody or people who have gone through it already that you can kind of like learn from their experience from. And for me, that's helpful, and that has proven helpful because it kind of stabilizes, when you're a little bit flustered and when you're a little bit kind of like, oh fuck, something's gone wrong, you can always lean on that as, well, out of 7 billion people, soon to be like 9 billion, I'm sure I'm not that unique and somebody else has gone through this. And if I spend time finding them and finding what they learned from that experience, I'll probably be all right.
Yeah, big. And would you recommend a podcast or a book for people that are looking to develop professionally or personally?
So there's a book that you can get on Amazon. It's called The Culture Map. And that really puts into perspective kind of different cultural nuances in different countries, especially if you're trying to start a business or, or you're trying to work internationally. There's that famous story about McDonald's trying to sell beef in India and not
Didn't go down very well.
Not understanding why Big Macs weren't selling.
Yeah.
So yeah, just things like that. I think it will stand you in good stead for if you're interested in either working for or starting a business that wants to scale internationally.
Amazing. Kenzo, thank you so much. Alex, have you got any closing words?
No, I think we've reflected on a lot of the takeaways as we've gone through this, but I personally have really enjoyed this conversation, and I'd even say it'd be great to probably get you back on at some point in the future to hear how the business is going, and how you're balancing it with your legal career. But it's been a pleasure.
Pleasure, guys.
And do you want to plug your socials and things before we close?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you head to @follow40 on Instagram, Twitter, and
it's FORTY.
That's correct. Yeah. @follow40. And you'll find us there. We've also got a page on Etsy. We've got a private website, and you will soon be able to get us back on Amazon Prime very shortly.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Thanks, Kenzo. So this brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you for listening, everyone. As always, please give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, leave us a comment. We'd really appreciate it. You can find us at on YouTube, Spotify, Google, Apple. If you search for Hard Work Beats Talent podcast, please follow us for future episodes. Thanks very much, and we're out.
Thanks, guys.